Maturity is not size. A $2 million business that has a really great functioning revenue system is more mature than a $10 million business that has never defined a pipeline stage for themselves at any point in their history. So I want to paint you a picture here of two founders to just drive this point home a little bit more clearly. One does 2 million and the business runs without the founder in every single deal. And the other one does 9 million and can't take a 2-week vacation because they have to be involved in everything, and revenue would wobble if they did take that 2-week vacation. The second company is less mature and not more successful than the first, even though they might be larger or generating more revenue. When you set out to build a business, part of what you're trying to do is build an asset, and that asset is worth as much as it is without you being a key man problem. And so if you're a leader and you have some sort of ownership in that particular company, it's the same thing. The value of the business is going to be based on how well could it run independently if somebody else were to buy it. If you've got particular individuals that are completely key in the entire sales motion, then you have something that is less valuable. And so by the end of this video, I want you to have an understanding of how I think about revenue operations and the maturity model that I use to be able to measure how companies are doing with their revenue operations and where they are in their process of maturing through the different competencies that they need to become proficient at in order to mature and become a business that is operating in a way that is independent of the founder or any specific leader. And that revenue process and that revenue generation engine is something that is very repeatable, predictable, and something that gives a lot of resources to the business long term. My name is Bradley DeVette. I help companies that, specifically B2B companies, that are experiencing the chaos of just day to day and feel like they're constantly fighting fires and they're not able to really get the business to have momentum. I help those companies that are experiencing that day to day chaos and coach them to focus on building the machine that is going to tame that chaos and make you more money. And that is going to be a predictable revenue operations, a predictable RevOps engine. And so I really help, I primarily focus on helping companies and helping founders get out of the founder-led sales motion and into a company that can generate leads and sales independent of the founder, such that the founder can then focus on doing and streamlining the processes on the other side of actually generating the revenue. So let's get into this and talk through this particular framework that I've developed so that you can understand where you are as a business in this particular framework and what you might need to focus on moving forward. A lot of the founders that I talk to say that they feel like their margins are getting eaten up by all of their expenses. They feel like as soon as they are able to generate a little bit of like free cash flow, then they're having to hire another person that then eats that up in order to be able to grow, and they're never really able to increase margins, or they're fighting fires constantly and not able to really create an asset that is independent of themselves. I would say that that is not a growth problem. It's actually a maturity problem. It means that the business runs on you, the founder or the leader of the business, and the effort that you put in, and not a system. In other words, like, you've really built yourself a job instead of a business. You've built yourself a cage that is dependent on you. The reasons for why you've done that, maybe they're psychological, maybe that you need to think about. Happy to talk with people about those things. I love getting into those conversations with founders and with leaders of companies, but there is an operational way that you can get yourself out of that, and just focusing on revenue operations. I would say that nobody fixes this with a strategy and a deck and a report. You fix it really by moving up the stages of maturity in your revenue operations. And that's what I'm going to share a little bit more with you about, and how I frame that model and how I think about moving companies and improving the maturity of your revenue operations using a competencies model framework. Let me bring up the revenue operations maturity model that I use so that we can just have something to visualize what this looks like. So here we go. This revenue operations maturity model is something that I've put together based on my experience in VC-backed startups, operating in marketing roles, sales roles, customer success roles. It's also something that I've put together based on my 4 years of experience building a digital marketing agency that spent a lot of time helping companies with their revenue operations infrastructure. It seemed like every time we were working with a company, we always had to get in and fix particular tools, systems, data hygiene before we could really start digging in and executing well to be able to measure success. And that's a primary component of what this model entails. What you'll notice is that it's broken down into 4 stages. There's the reactive stage, the repeatable stage, predictable, and then compounding. And each one of these stages has a particular set of competencies. That's what you see listed out here. These competencies each one has a definition to them and a way of measuring them. I'll give you a couple examples here. In this reactive stage is really exactly what it sounds like, and the problems that I've been describing previously. It's the fact that you're in a spot where you don't have the right systems, tools, infrastructure in place to be able to have a process that works independent of the founder or a leader in the business. Revenue is going to be dependent on network. If you're doing this particular stage is about getting things right so that you have the right foundation to be able to level up into the repeatable stage next. So I'll give you a quick, insight into what one of these competencies looks like. So for ideal customer profile, in order for any company to be able to sell really well and to actually generate a predictable revenue engine, you're going to need to understand who your ideal customer profile is. Maybe you have a couple of ideal customer profiles, but this is really about helping you understand who are the people that you should be focused on selling to and who are the people you should not be focused on selling to. If you are focused on selling to everyone and anyone you possibly can, and you're doing complete custom bespoke work every single time, you're not generating a business that can actually have a repeatable process and a function. You're creating something that is highly, highly complex and hard to repeat on a regular basis. That's going to require a lot of resources from you. And oftentimes it's very hard to be able to price appropriately in order to make that work. You need to have a lot of credibility, a lot of brand recognition. Maybe that's you, maybe it's not. But we'll just go through this and so you have a better idea of this. Really ideal customer profile, ability to be able to define, document, and operationalize a precise description of your best fit customer, including who you are not for, and to use the definition to guide targeting qualification and where you spend your time. Makes sense. How I'm going to measure this, right? A couple statements here that help measure exactly what's going on. You're at a 1, which is you don't want to be at a 1, you want to be at a 5, right? So 1's the low end. You sell to anyone who can pay. When I ask the team who your ideal customer is and get 5 different answers, that's not a good thing. Nothing's written down. Versus on the other end of the spectrum here, a tiered model validating against a cohort data. Disqualification is systematic. You can say exactly what a tier 1 client is worth versus a tier 2 client. So it runs the gambit here of you're really reactive. You can actually define this and you're starting to use it and systemize it. You've documented it. You have a slide of some sort. You're scoring it in the CRM. but maybe not targeting it specifically. It's rarely referenced in a real decision. Continuing to move up, a written ICP with specific criteria and explicit disqualification list. Sales uses it to qualify, marketing to target. Most of the team can describe it, right? So you can see how we start to level up, encoding in CRM scoring and using to prioritize. In other words, if you have a salesperson, you're actually scoring these things based on how closely they fit your ideal customer profile, and you're having your salespeople go after that particular person in their list of tasks to do first, versus someone else. This gets reviewed on a quarterly basis, and we look at the closed won and closed lost data to see how well it's tracking to the ideal customer profile and whether that definition needs to be tweaked or refined. And we take a look at the win rate and the lifetime value of those particular customers that are part of your ideal customer profile, and again, continue to see. What we really want to see is that ideal customer profile is something that is going to have as a customer that has higher lifetime value for you, and is something that has less friction in the sale. They just get it. You understand their pain points. You can speak to those pain points really, really clearly. They understand what it is that you're doing. They think it's valuable, and there's less friction in trying to convince them. They get it, they want it, and they buy. That's what we want to see with an ideal customer profile as an example. When it comes to scoring these things and how I score for the way that I coach people, I look at the data that's in your systems. I look at a questionnaire that I give to you, and then I also look at just conversations that we're having with recorded calls and those sorts of things. That gives me an idea of, I crunch all of that quantitative, qualitative data together with my own AI tools and things that I've built, and then can score you on how we're doing on this particular competency. I'll go through one more just so that you can get an idea of what this looks like, because this is like a really concrete one. Pipeline stage design, right? The ability to be able to define your pipeline stages as buyer decision milestones, things that buyers actually did rather than sales activities, with a documented exit criteria for each stage that must be verified before a deal moves forward. So that's what it would look like if you were doing your stages well. What it looks like at a low maturity, the stages in the CRM are the default ones. You haven't really designed them yourself. Nobody can say what actually moves a deal forward. In other words, like the moving a deal from one stage to the next is sort of just a judgment call based on whoever the salesperson is that's working it. Or maybe you working it. The stage changes when the rep feels good about that. Yeah, like I just said. As we start to move up, we can jump to here at number 3. Every stage has a written exit criteria that is a buyer action, not a sales activity. So it's the buyer booked a call. The buyer sent us the data we need in order to be able to produce a proposal. And not just the salesperson or who you sent them a proposal. It's not based on our activities. It's based on their activities as a buyer. And then eventually we get to the point where these particular stages, we've got fields built into the CRM that are basically required to be filled out in order for the stage to be the deal to actually be moved, right? That's how when we're starting to do that, we're really actioning that and making that part of the system and the process. And it means that a salesperson tries to move this particular deal to the next stage. Nope, not going to allow you to do that. You're going to get tossed an error, and you're going to have to go fill in the data. Eventually, where we start getting to is like, hey, how can we get AI to start doing this stuff for us? I think one of the things that there's a lot of stuff out on the internet right now around go-to-market strategies, revenue operations, trying to automate things as much as possible with AI. I think automating things as much as possible with AI is absolutely the right thought process. I would say that as if you're trying to just implement AI on top of bad foundations, you're going to just accelerate a bad process. You really need to go back to the foundational elements of these competencies and make sure that we've got these things and we understand these concepts and we're doing them right before we start adding AI on top in order to be able to accelerate what it is that we're doing and automate what it is that we're doing. We need to have good data in the systems in order for AI to have good context. We need to have good tools and infrastructure set up that the AI agents can navigate appropriately in order for those things to be able to do what we want them to do on a repeated basis time and time again. So that gives you an idea of what I would call the how I think about these competencies and how I start to define them such that I can, and then how I would measure you on these particular things. But just go through these as a concept. So first off, this reactive stage, you've got these competencies in here: revenue lifecycle design, CRM architecture and governance, data quality management, pipeline stage, lead qualification framework. Those two sort of go hand in hand. Data quality management is super important. Just CRM architecture and governance is super important. This is just like making sure that you've got the right things set up in your CRM and you are gathering the data that you need to about each deal that comes in. Are you able to, take lead information form fills and organize them appropriately? Do you understand which contacts need to continue to be nurtured over a longer period of time because they're not ready to talk to sales yet and sales shouldn't be engaging with them versus they should? This is all foundational to that kind of thing. The next stage in this process of maturing is repeatability, right? Do we have systems exist and the team can follow without you managing every interaction? The CRM is the record and core processes are written down. The data isn't fully trusted. The forecast is still a gut call and growth still feels a little like it has friction to it. So that's the idea behind the repeatable phase. We're trying to get all of the right things in a state where, yep, we know what the processes are. We have the tools in place. The team is following these things. We're doing this on a repeatable way. It's not that every single time we sell something, we're doing it in a different sort of way. And here's our set of competencies that go along with being able to do that really well. The next stage is predictability. So rather than, I feel like we're getting, there we go. Rather than this being something that, great, it's repeatable, now we want to see that it's actually something that is predictable. So we can start running forecasts and we can start doing things like knowing that we're going to generate a certain number of leads each month and that we can see consistently that we're closing a certain percentage of those leads each month. And that's leading to a certain amount of revenue each month that starts to become more and more predictable over time, right? So these things start to do with competencies like deal scoring. How are we going through and analyzing our closed won and closed lost? What's the velocity of the sales cycle look like? What's the health scoring once we actually sell a deal that we do in order to make sure that it doesn't churn? I think that's a thing, customer success or customer support, whatever you might call it, once something's actually sold, is a part of your revenue operations. I think it's like oftentimes forgotten about because marketing and sales in the front end and bringing in that new business is oftentimes the place that people want to focus. Having good practices set up for your customer support and customer success such that if you do have a recurring revenue business that you're doing, that that those particular customers aren't churning out and that you're doing that really, really well, depending upon your business model, that's super important to be doing and making sure that you've got those processes in place as well, not just marketing and sales. So customer success as well, customer support as well. We start getting into how are we doing multi-touch attribution. Attribution ends up being a major competency. If you can't track where leads are coming from and where deals are coming from. And when deals close, where are the sources that they are coming from for the ones that close the most? You want to know that information. You got to have the right infrastructure in place to be able to track that. That part of that at that repeatable place. Once we start getting into this predictable place, we start looking at like, okay, what's the multi-touch model that we want to be running? In other words, great. It's nice to know the original source for where that particular lead came from. They came from a ad that we did online, and then they came to the site and eventually filled out a form and for a PDF, and then they eventually signed up for a call. With the multi-touch attribution, what you're looking at is like, hey, is it the case that like pretty much all of the people that download the PDF or do the webinar end up buying? That's an interesting thing to note. Maybe we need to double down on that. So it's about collecting the data that you learn over and over, that you continue to learn from and understand what do we double down on and what do we get rid of, and having that infrastructure to be able to track that data, being able to then analyze that data to make good decisions off of it. That's where all of this leads to. It's all about how do we make sure we have the infrastructure in place to collect the data, to have the data, to analyze it, to then make good decisions based on this. That's a lot of what the predictable phase is about. It's like, are we analyzing things in a way that helps us make good decisions about the business? And then eventually we get to compounding. And this is sort of the pinnacle. This is where we are starting to do really advanced things like scenario modeling and sensitivity analysis, having an overall like growth scorecard that we're tracking on a regular basis. Yeah. These things start to get to the point where we're just figuring out that's all we're doing is we're just in this mode of constantly looking at all of the data that we're in and figuring out how to make improvements to what's going on, because we're super confident in the systems and the processes that you've got in place. So how would you use this for yourself? You don't need all 40 plus competencies right away. You need to know your stage and the 2 or 3 gaps holding you at that particular stage. That's the important part. It's focusing on what's the next step in front of you. I find from the questionnaires I do with leaders, most founders self-rate one stage too high. They think that they're doing these things better than they actually are. For example, like the test is not, do we have do we know what our ICP is? The test is, do we have a document that says what the ICP is? Have we actually documented that and circulated it around and made sure that the team knows it? So yeah, and does the team do this without me, right? You might know or have in your head what these particular things are, but if the team isn't doing the processes without you, then it's not working. The path is, I think, always the same shape. Get the foundations really set in stage 1, make it repeatable in stage 2, make it predictable in stage 3, and then it starts to compound on itself after that. If you want to know your exact stage, I've built a scorecard that places you and shows you exactly where you are and what your biggest gaps are. You can go to that right over here. I'll link to it in the description of the video as well. The other thing that I've built so that you can understand this particular model in a little bit more depth as well is a revenue maturity playbook. You can find that right over here. If you would like to go and take a look at that PDF that you could download, take a look at that, see the example company that I've put there and sort of what it looks like for them. Moving forward, I'm going to take this particular model and rather than just talk about it in generalities like I have today for just B2B businesses in general, I want to go through for each vertical that I work with and give you a little bit more of an in-depth view of like, okay, this is what it looks like for an MSP company. This is what it looks like for a commercial field operations company. This is what it looks like for agencies when you are doing these things not so well and doing these things well, so that you start to recognize the symptoms for yourself. If you're liking this and you feel like this is something that you need and you need to pay more attention to, go ahead and subscribe, and you'll see more of the videos that I put here so that you can help optimize your revenue operations for your company and get to the point where you're not feeling like the business is super chaotic and you can step back from things yourself for a little bit and know that the company is going to continue to operate on a regular basis.